At the current police station, family and friends gathered. Details of the death of their kin still as scanty. Key suspect Richard Alden, a British national and former CEO of Wangechi Group, already in custody. The suspect had taken the deceased 42-year-old Grace Wangechi Kinyanjui to the current hospital on Saturday, claiming she had shot herself. The hospital in turn alerting the police.
Dark Echoes 254. Grace Wangechi Kinyanjui, aged 42, was a Kenyan woman whose life radiated energy, warmth and responsibility. She had never married and had no children of her own, yet she stood at the center of a large family. To her brothers, her sister, and her nieces and nephews who adored her, Grace was more than a kin. She was the breadwinner and their head, the one they looked to for guidance and support. Those who knew her remembered her as sociable and full of life. She carried herself with ease in any crowd, her confidence drawing friends and acquaintances alike. Outgoing and spirited, she thrived in company, always in motion, always in conversation. At the time of her death, Grace was said to be in excellent health and high spirits, a woman at the end of the peak of her career and her confidence. Her uncle, Njoroge Wainaina, called her an icon in the family, a figure whose strength and ambition gave her loved ones a sense of pride. On the day her story ended, Grace was in the company of Richard David Alden, a man whose world of privilege and wealth contrasted sharply with her own, and whose name would forever be linked to the tragedy that claimed her life. Richard Alden, then 53, was a British businessman with a polished resume and serious wealth. He had built his career in the telecoms industry, first rising to prominence in Spain, where he ran the cable giant Ono from 1998 to 2009 before overseeing its sale for billions. By the time he moved to Kenya, he was already regarded as a seasoned executive, and his role as the CEO of Wangechi, an East African telecom and pay TV company, placed him in the ranks of Nairobi's business elite. He lived in Karen, one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, a world defined by gated compounds, high walls, and quiet privilege. Alden embodied power and status, a foreigner with money, connections, and the security of influence. His path crossed with Grace in this Nairobi setting, where the social and economic gap between them could not be ignored. She, a single Kenyan looking for stability, and he, a global executive rooted in privilege. Richard David Alden and Grace Wangechi Kinyanjui first crossed paths in Nairobi through a hiking group that toured Kenya's scenic landscape. Their friendships extended into social cycles, and in June 2015, they both ran in Lewa Marathon, held in Wildlife Conservancy, where Prince William had proposed to Kate Middleton years earlier. Alden, originally from Cowbridge, Wales, was no ordinary expatriate. He had moved to Kenya in 2013 to serve as CEO of Wangechi Group, the parent company of Zuku Internet. By 2015, he stepped down but continued to hold senior positions abroad, including chairman of Sofianada Capital and non-executive director of Spanish telecom firm Euskaltel. His professional background was matched by a comfortable lifestyle. Alden and his wife Martine had raised 3 children in London before relocating overseas, and by 2016, they were based in Nairobi, Karen suburb, one of the city's most exclusive addresses. In June 4, 2016, Grace visited Alden residence on Windy Ridge Road in Karen. The house, tucked behind walls and guarded gates, projected wealth and security. Yet that day it became the scene of grim and mysterious death. At some point during her visit, Grace suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the back of her head. Alden later told police she had accidentally shot herself while handling his licensed pistol. According to him, she was simply trying to familiarize herself with this weapon when it discharged. That version of events would become a foundation of his defense, but the postmortem finding raised troubling questions. Grace's body bore more than a single gunshot wound. Pathologists reported fractures in her left thumb and ring finger, 3 deep cuts on the left side of her neck, and stab-like injuries on her back. To investigators, this looked less like an accident and more like evidence of violent struggle. Inside the current mansion, detectives recovered a spent cartridge and Alden's pistol, and still held 34 live rounds. A blood-stained towel was also found in the dressing room where the shooting took place. For the then Nairobi Police Chief Japheth Koome, the conclusion was clear. This was no mishap, it is murder. Accounts from Alden's own guard added to suspicion. They told police they saw him dragging Grace's body to his car before driving her to Nairobi Hospital. She was pronounced dead on arrival. By the next day, June 5th, Alden had been arrested, and on June 6th, he was formally charged with murder. His house help and security were also detained for questioning. The arrest sent shockwaves through Nairobi's elite circle and into the international press. A prominent foreign executive, a Kenyan woman with links to the expatriate scene, and a violent death inside one of the capital's most exclusive neighborhoods. When the case reached the Milimani law courts, the prosecution framed it as a crime of passion. They described Grace as Alden's mistress and argued the evening had spiraled into violence. They leaned heavily on the autopsy results, the bullet wound to the back of her head and the other injuries that suggested she had fought back. Prosecutors also opposed bail, warning that Alden's wealth, international connection, and dual home abroad made him a serious flight risk. But the defense countered every claim. They dismissed suggestions of a romantic relationship, insisting Grace was nothing more than a friend. Her death, they argued, was a tragic accident. Ballistic experts from the defense suggested the fatal bullet may have ricocheted off the floor before striking Grace. They also emphasized that Alden had voluntarily rushed the hospital, an action inconsistent with guilt. His wife Martine flew in from Europe and attended court sessions, a visible display of family support. Justice Lasit weighed the argument and ultimately granted bail of 2 million Kenyan shillings in cash and the surrender of Alden's passport. To some, the decision showed that the prosecution's case was not airtight. The trial dragged on through 2016 and 2017, exposing flaws in the investigation. Witnesses contradicted each other. Forensic experts disagreed on the trajectory of the bullets. The prosecution struggled to establish motive or to prove conclusively that Alden and Grace were romantically involved. With every inconsistency, the possibility of conviction weakened. By December 2017, the case collapsed. The state formally withdrew the charges, citing insufficient evidence and the support of Grace's own family in ending the legal battle. After 18 months under the shadow of a murder charge, Alden walked free. Yet, even with the case closed, questions lingered. Why did Grace's body show injuries beyond a single gunshot wound? Why were key forensic details left unresolved? And why did investigators fail to build a watertight case? For Grace's family, the withdrawal of charges may have brought closure, but it was closure without justice. That night in Karen marked a turning point in two lives. Grace ended violently and Alden shifted from boardroom to prison cells and courtrooms before returning to freedom. What truly happened behind the locked gates in Windy Ridge Road remains a mystery. Whether a tragic accident or something more sinister, it is the story that ends in silence, leaving the truth buried with Grace herself. Grace's death did not make headlines, it broke a family. At her funeral, her uncle Njoroge Wainaina reminded mourners of the post-mortem reports. A bullet had entered from behind, ending the life of a woman who had been in perfect health only moments earlier. More than 500 people came to honor Grace. To them, she was not a statistic, but the lifeblood of her family. Though she had never married or had children, she supported her siblings, nieces, and nephews. She was sociable, outgoing, and deeply loved. Wainaina asked questions that still haunts the case. Would such a woman, vibrant and ambitious, really take her own life? His answers was final. That's out of the question. Yet by December 2017, the murder charges against Richard Alden collapsed. The state withdrew the case, with Grace's own family supporting the move. Alden walked free, the court ruling that the burden of proof for murder had not been met. But freedom is not innocence. What lingered was a gap between the violent injuries on Grace's body, the contradictions in testimony, and the silence of a justice system too weak or too compromised to deliver clarity. Alden wasted no time leaving Kenya. He gave interviews abroad, portraying himself as a victim of a public witch hunt, a wealthy foreigner turned into a scapegoat. But in Nairobi, his words fed resentment that decades after independence, wealth and whiteness still bent justice. The case also reached his family. His wife Martine faced hostility in Nairobi and hired personal security when she visited him in prison. Yet she built unlikely bridges, speaking with Alden's jailers and even reaching out to Grace's grieving relatives. Grace's mother, Anastasia, stunned many when she told Alden she did not believe that she had murdered her daughter. She said, "I don't believe a person like you would murder anybody." She continued, "But if you were to do it, why on earth would you do it in broad daylight? Then take my daughter to the hospital." She later filed an affidavit declaring her belief that Grace's death was a tragic accident. Alden spared no expense in his defense. He hired top lawyers in Kenya and in UK, and had enlisted Geoffrey Arnold, a former Metropolitan Police firearms expert. Arnold concluded the fatal bullet had ricocheted off the floor before striking Grace. According to his account, she had picked up the gun from the safe, paused in front of the mirror, and pulled the trigger, not knowing the chamber was loaded. Alden admitted to leaving the bullet chambered, citing fear of intruders in his current home. He said, "There is an element of culpability in that." He continued, "I will have to live with it for the rest of my life." Remarkably, the Aldens' relationship with Grace's family endured. They even spent Christmas together in Nanyuki at the Aldens' holiday home near Mount Kenya. Alden, reflecting later, insisted he still loved the country that had nearly destroyed him. He said, "I love the country and I love the people." His defense team dismissed claims that Grace had been shot from behind. They argued the head wound was an exit, not an entry. They highlighted testimony from the maid who had a gunshot but no struggle, just laughter moments earlier. The defense also suggested detectives would recover selfies from Grace's phone, showing her posing with the gun that killed her. To them, this was proof of tragic accident, not murder. Yet, the unease never lifted. Grace's injuries included fractures and neck wounds, damage not explained by a single ricochet. Investigators had bought the evidence, and the prosecution could not stitch a coherent case. In the end, it was doubt, not truth, that won. When I look at the case of Grace Wangechi, I see a story less about justice and more about power. Who holds it, who doesn't, and how easily it bends institution. Grace wasn't just another life in court. She was a 42-year-old woman, carving her path in a city that rarely makes space for women like her. She walked into that Karen mansion alive and left in a body bag. The injuries of her body suggested violence, yet somehow, in the courtroom, her death was rebranded as an accident. Richard Alden was no ordinary suspect. He had wealth, influence, and the means to hire experts to spin a narrative polished enough to fracture the case. The prosecution stumbled, the family, drained and grieving, gave way, and the system, fragile as ever, let the story slip through its hands. So here we are, a woman dead, a man free, and a case closed with more questions than answers. Was Grace a mistress, a friend, or something in between? Did she handle a weapon? Or was she silenced in violence? We may never know, because the truth was buried beneath privilege, money, and silence. Justice that bends to power is not justice at all. Grace's story should haunt us because it shows how easily a life can be erased and how silence, not truth, became the final verdict.